today. So David, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And what's going on?
Well, thank you for having me, Cindy. Needless to say, the last 2 months have been surreal for all of us. I think we are learning or have learned that the future is not going to look at all like what the past looked like. But I think we're adapting pretty well. What I am a little concerned about is people, they're frustrated. They feel as though they've been pent up for the last couple of months and they now just want to get out there. And I think that is fine. However, it has to be done in a measured manner. I think most people do that. It's nice to see people out walking about. As you know, I see you walking my dog all the time. You're walking your dogs. It's easier to do that to some extent on the Cape. We are fortunate, but people need to also remember that we've got to be mindful of the need to socially distance. You know, I think of it going forward, the next few weeks, we're about to move into phase 2 of the governor's plan. I know a lot of the restaurant owners are happy, but they've got to learn, like I said before, business is going to be different. How are we going to ensure that people socially distance in our restaurants? In the near term, it's all going to be outdoor. And so therefore, that is going to help their finances, but it's not going to be what it used to be because you're not going to be able to serve quite as many people. I know that the library has offered some restaurants the green next to the building as a way of doing that. And I thank you for doing that. So that's certainly one iteration. The next one, of course, are the stores. I think the governor's phase 2 has them open on Monday, but there are restrictions as to the number of people per square foot that can be in the building at the same time. And that includes employees. And of course, masks for everyone. Masks are not a sign of weakness. Masks are the way that we now exist. You know, when this first started, I happened to be on an elevator and the first person I saw with a mask was on the elevator and he turned to me and said, almost sheepish, I have a cancerous condition. And I looked at him and said, you needn't feel awkward about wearing your mask. You're actually the prudent one. And so I think that's what we're all getting exposed to at this point. Let me ask you a question for a second. Where do you stand with regard to the library's readiness to move forward?
We are ready to go. We have been working on this since the day we had to close. If you go to our website, we have a video, and our video was also featured on the Mass Library Systems for all of Massachusetts as a example for other libraries in the state on preparedness and educating the public about what you're doing. We've moved things around. We have 5 hand washing stations for employees. We have 8 cleaning, disinfecting stations around the library to wipe down tables or furniture, anything like that. We have gel at the doors. We have gel around the library. We have masks. We have gloves. As I said, we've rearranged. We've allowed for social distancing, and we have the shields up and things like that. So we've done our best to protect both the staff and the patrons. We will continue to offer curbside, but people can still come in and browse for books and check them out and use the computers. We do have to follow the guidelines of, you know, how many people in the library and, you know, people wearing masks as long as they're physically able to. And, you know, we're looking forward to seeing everybody. So we're anxious.
Well, I'm sure you'll be well equipped. I've said this to others, so I will say it to you as well. I do believe the Osterville Village Library is the crown jewel of the Cape's library system. So we are fortunate to have you, and I thank you for everything that you do, because I think you're very forward thinking, and I have no doubt that you are equipped to move forward into this next phase of our reality.
So there's been a lot of other issues going around now, and would you like to address the race issue going on? I know you talked about it at the town council meeting last night.
I did. Those that know me know that I don't, perhaps to a fault, lead with my race. I like to think that we are more alike than we are different. However, I'm not so naive as to think that everyone doesn't think that way. And I think that what you're seeing now is a reflection of that. And I think it's a function of a couple of things. Number one, it actually does have a little bit to do in a very distinct way with the current circumstance. People are just, they feel frustration. And then you layer on to that this current number of incidents involving Black men, principally in this case, at the hands of police officers. And people get to the point, it's a powder keg moment, where they say, when is enough enough? And I don't know the answer to that question. I thought, frankly, for example, with regard to gun rights, Newtown would be enough is enough. And what we saw was that was not the case. But you know, when you think back, despite the fact that I said, I like to say, I don't lead with my race. The fact is, I know that when I walk in the door, or when I'm walking my dog in the village of Osterville, or anywhere, people don't see Dave Bogon, the lawyer. The first thing they say is, oh, there's that African-American man. They don't know anything about me, and they immediately form impressions. And I think that what people are doing now is to say, that is wrong. We can't keep doing that. We can't have people acting in a way simply because they believe they have a right to act that way based upon their own perceptions. You know, when you see things like what happened to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, who seemed to simply be out running, and yet he was shot down, you know, for being Black, running while Black. When does it stop? And yet, on the other hand, not that it's right, I understand that these are all very deep-seated beliefs that people have based upon a legacy of slavery, what, you know, our implicit biases that came out of, you know, there's a lot of discussion these days about white privilege. And those are hard conversations to have. But I think we need to have that if we're going to bridge the gap and see that we are more alike than we are different. So those are my current views on it. It's a complicated subject, and it's not a comfortable discussion to have, but it is one that we need to have.
I know, and the town of Barnstable lost a great leader with Mr. Toby passing. I remember him all through the years growing up and always being a role model and a leader in the community. And he was a great man to everybody who knew him.
Yeah, I said last night, I read a lot about Harold. I did not know him, but I understand I, to some extent, ride on his coattails. I live in his shadow, and it does, to some extent, instill a sense of obligation. What am I going to do to help not young African-American or Latino or persons of color or people who possess a different sexual orientation? What am I going to do to make the world a better place for them? I've had to think long and hard about that because if I don't do something to help that, then why I have, it would be a waste. So I'm trying to do what I can.
And everybody should be working to try to make the world a better place.
Well, you know, the problem is, and this is what I mean when I say, and I don't want to get philosophical here, that it's a hard conversation. But that's when people have to realize, you know, I like to think of it as it's a 100-yard dash, but some people started with a 25-yard head start. And so therefore, when you point out that fact, they get defensive. And so therefore it's hard to bridge the gap so that we can move forward collectively. And I have to tell you that I do find some of the current narrative doesn't help in that regard. It doesn't serve to bridge the gap. Basically what it does is to widen the divide. And we all have to work collectively to see that that's not the case. Otherwise, we as a society are not going to move forward.
I agree. Well, thank you for that. You know, the other thing is it's coming up now on the summer season on the Cape. And I know one of the other issues has been the short-term rentals. and all the things that go along with that. Where does that stand now in the town of Barnstable?
I look at it in two phases. First of all, you may have read there certainly is a Cape Cod task force looking at reopening issues, and they are coordinating through Senator Sear, Representative Peake, and others, and Mark Ells is part of that. Our town manager is part of that task force, working with the governor's office to try to optimize what's available to our businesses and residents on the Cape. That includes things like the beaches. The beaches are opened in the town of Barnstable. They are trying to make sure that people actually exercise social distancing. But of course, then the other issue is the Cape has roughly 15 weeks in which to optimize its revenues, and that includes those people that engage in short-term rentals. And just so that we're clear, short-term rentals are generally characterized as anything less than 30 days. To my mind, the historic Cape Cod short-term rentals, I think we all know, were the Saturday to Saturdays. What has happened though with the ad, and I think we talked about this last time, such as Airbnb, VRBO, and HomeAway, it has morphed into periods that are sometimes shorter than that. And so we have to be mindful and careful that we don't allow that, at least from my perspective, to the extent that it undermines our traditional single-family residential zones. So the governor's task force, the governor's reopening, his 4-phase reopening plan does have, we are now moving into phase 2. That does, as I understand it, allow hotels and motels to open, again, with very rigorous requirements with regard to cleaning and recommendations, et cetera. With regard to short-term rentals, that is still an open issue. I think the governor may make some sort of announcement. I think he may have tasked the Attorney General or Lieutenant Governor to make a recommendation, and that could come as early as tomorrow. But in all likelihood, that is not going to mean that you can engage in short-term rentals for periods of as short as 1, 3, 5 days, beginning, say, Monday. But we don't know where that stands. So it's still an open issue there. On the local front, interestingly, there's 2 phases. There are several Cape towns that have put out a survey. I think Eastham did. Truro was part of that initiative, asking residents what they believe is the appropriate period for short-term rentals. But I think they were thinking in terms of 5, 7, or 30 days. The current proposal in the town of Barnstable, at least that came out of the Zoning and Regulatory Committee, is short-term rentals, and we talked about this last time, for as short as 1 day, 365 days a year. I have been adamant in my opposition to that because, to my mind, that basically turns every home in the town of Barnstable into a hotel and totally destroys decades of zoning. Perhaps more concerning, and I alluded to this last night because I got a letter from a constituent, and in fact, I can say it was John Crow, who you know is the president of the Osterville Village Association, who recently made a records request of the town related to a shooting incident that occurred in January in Hyannis, and it apparently occurred at an Airbnb. That, to my knowledge, has not been the subject of a lot of publication. It was not, to the best of my knowledge, in any of reported in that manner by any of our newspapers. And I think that's information that the public needs to know as we engage in this dialogue. Perhaps equally as disconcerting to me was that it apparently was not the subject of any discussion as part of the Zoning and Regulatory Committee, and yet the precinct in which it occurred, the town councilor for that precinct is on that committee. So I think that's information that needs to get out. Mark Ells responded last night that that's still the subject of ongoing investigation. Prisana Bennett confirmed that, and I asked that they provide the town council with a briefing so that we know where we are, because when I was approached and asked about it, my response was, I don't know what you're talking about, and that should never be the case. I, as a town councilor, should certainly be aware of that, and certainly residents should be aware of that as we consider what to do with regard to short-term rentals. So that's where we are. It is currently scheduled to go before the planning board. I don't know the exact date. I know the tentative date for consideration of whatever the proposal is, at least at the town level, is that it will be considered by the town council in July, where I am hopeful it will be the subject of significant amendments so that we have something that's more reasonable than short-term rentals for as short as one day of 365 days a year.
Yes, that makes sense. Well, wow. It's a lot going on. Is there anything else from the town council meeting or anything going on that you would like to share or bring up?
No, I think that's basically it. As you can imagine, right now we're in the midst of budget approval. That was last night's meeting. We did not get through half of the agenda, and so much of it was deferred until the meeting on June 18th, including the school budget, which is always a hot button issue. So we'll move forward on June 18th with regard to consideration of the rest of those budget items.
Okay. Well, David, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to talk with us and letting everybody know what's going on. You've always been so open with us, and I appreciate that so much. It's always nice to know what's going on and that you're always there, available through email, and your website always has great information, and you set up that Osterville Helps during this time. So we appreciate all you do for the community. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, I thank you. The feeling is mutual, and I appreciate your having me and appreciate everything you do, and look forward to working collaboratively as we go forward.
Sounds good. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Cindy.